Okay, so we're going to be reading a book together. You've already got your Google Slides started for taking notes. And there are some books that I read because they just have a really strong theme and they teach a really valuable lesson. And there are some books that I read that are just really, really moving and emotional. And there's some books that I just love the way that the author says something. The word choice they have is really good. This book is just fun. I like to read this book because it's fun. Yes, you got a question over here?
Yeah, what do we use this book for the plot?
So on your Google Slides, we're going to have a page that says plot, or a slide that says plot, and just that's where you're doing summaries of what's happening in the story. So the plot is just basically if someone says, what's the story about, and you start telling it, that's the plot. All right. So the book starts with this dedication at the beginning, and it says, the characters depicted in this book are real. Any similarity to cartoon characters, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Does that sound normal, like a normal dedication? It's a little flipped around, right? Normally they say, for legal purposes, like, these are made-up characters. If it sounds just like someone, we're not don't sue us. But this book went the opposite direction and said they're all real. It also has a little intro here that says, the pen is mightier than the sword, though both could ruin a good shirt. That's the kind of humor that's going to be in here. It's going to be a little bit weird, a little bit off the wall. And before each chapter, they have this section that says, a little advice. So we're going to start with a little advice. If I could give you all just one word of advice, it would be, well, an incomplete sentence. Besides being grammatically iffy, I'm sure that you'd agree a single word of advice is rarely of much use. Even the phrase, look out, which could prove to be especially helpful and life-saving, especially when falling objects or missing manhole covers are concerned, is 2 words. To simply shout out, look, to a friend as the tuba falls from a 9th-story window toward his unsuspecting head will at best only serve to make sure he gets a good look at the tuba before it parades him unceremoniously into the sidewalk. And so throughout this book, I will attempt to offer more than one word of wisdom, whether you want it or not. Because after all, that's what we do here at the National Center for Unsolicited Advice. However, I will at the same time try not to be too overbearing, because as we all know, no one likes a busybody. It seems as though every time you turn around, and believe me, you turn around way more than you think, someone is telling you what to do or what not to do. Parents, teachers, classmates, bosses, co-workers, know-it-all parakeets, talking snowmen, the list goes on. And though this is technically an advice book, it is not the typical stuffy and boring sort, because unlike most advice books, this one is chock full of suspense, danger, adventure, mystery, simple yet delicious recipes for squash, and of course, paper, since that's what most books are chock full of. I should also inform you that in addition to the above-mentioned elements, you will also encounter within the pages of this book words that are not presently in any dictionary, but by all accounts should be. Dictionaries, in my experience, are full of words that most people will never, ever use. Words like tryphanosomonasis, benzaldehyde, and kloof. At the same time, the snobbish dictionary conglomerates refuse to include words that people use on a daily basis. Words such as nother, as in that's a whole nother story. Or boughten, as in I haven't bought in a dictionary in years. And may I say that I'm most pleased that you have bought in this book, and I hope you enjoy reading it as much as I've enjoyed plagiarizing it from Freeway Overpass Graffiti. And just think, if you hadn't bought in this book, you would never have discovered the invaluable advice contained herein. And you would never have been able to share in the harrowing adventures and narrow escapes of Mr. Ethan Cheeseman and his 3 children, who you will soon find are quite possibly the most friendless, and conversely, the least friendful children in the entire United States. All right, so if you are taking notes out there, you want to make sure you have a slide for Ethan, and his last name is Cheeseman, like Cheese Man. And then it said that he had 3 children, so you might as well go ahead and start 3 more slides, and we'll name those whenever we find out their names in just a second. Chapter 1. If you're anything like me, and most of you are by virtue of your cell structure, you'll agree that there's nothing quite as sad as a child with no friends. The children of Mr. Ethan Ch1 found themselves in a near constant state of friendlessness, though through absolutely no fault of their own. By all accounts, the 3 youngsters were smart, pleasant, witty, attractive, polite, and relatively odor-free. All traits that generally result in one having plenty of friends. Their state of perennial friendlessness could be attributed solely to the fact that they were never in one place long enough to form any lasting relationships. You see, Ethan Ch1 was a scientist and inventor by trade, and when he moved closer to perfecting a device so incredible, a device that could be used for either immense good or unspeakable evil, he found that suddenly everyone, from corporate criminals to top secret government agencies to international super spies, desired to get their hands on this brilliant new creation. Ethan realized that this remarkable device would only ever be safe in his own hands. And so one night he made a decision. He would disassemble the partially completed machine, load it into the family station wagon along with his 3 sleepy children, and disappear. And he would remain in a state of disappearedness until this device, known simply as the LVR, could be completed, perfected, and used to reclaim the life of Olivia, his beautiful wife and mother of his 3 smart, polite, and relatively odor-free children. That was nearly 2 years ago, and since then Mr. Ch1 and his children have been on the run, scarcely keeping one step ahead of these corporate villains, foreign intelligence operatives, and members of government agencies so secret that no one, not even those who work for them, know their names. Of course, there's much more to be told about all of that, but it will have to wait, because at this very moment, Mr. Ch1 is busy waking his children so he can once again hurry them into the family station wagon, along with all their earthly possessions, and move them to yet another town, far away from those who have designs on his wonderfully useful, yet incomplete invention. All right, we're going to pause there for just a second. So what do we know about his wife? Go ahead.
Beautiful.
What?
She's beautiful.
She is beautiful.
She's not alive.
She's not alive. So they said it's been a couple of years, I think, since she passed away. So this maybe could be a Disney movie someday. They start with a tragedy right up front, like a lot of their movies do. Huh, interesting. Why would they introduce a character that's already gone? I'm wondering about that, but we'll have to get back to that later. Some of you might have predictions that you type into your slides. I don't know. Nothing wrong with that. All right, I'm going to go back to the story. Let's go now, said Mr. Ch1, bursting into the room where his boys slept peacefully and completely unaware. We must be out of here in less than an hour. It's 3 a.m, groaned 14-year-old Barton, the eldest of Mr. Ch1's 3 bright children. Can't we sleep a little longer? I was having this great dream about pitching a no-hitter in the World Series. Big deal, came a voice from across the room. You always have that dream. The voice belonged to Barton's 8-year-old brother, Crandall, who had a habit of waking up in a very grumpy state, regardless of the time. Yeah, but the dream is always ruined when I suddenly realize I'm not wearing pants, said Barton. This is the first time I remembered to wear pants, and I'm not even allowed to enjoy it. It's not every day you get to pitch a no-hitter in the World Series with your pants on. Mr. Ch1 flipped on the light, an action that resulted in even more groaning. One day you'll pitch a no-hitter in the World Series for real, said Mr. Ch1, always supportive of his children's ambitions. But not if we don't get out of here ahead of the Coats. I'm going to pause there for a second. Yes?
Oh, what's her 8-year-old brother's name?
Okay, so far we've got Barton, Barton, and the younger brother is Crandall, Crandall. And we might want to start a page for this group of guys that are chasing them that he called coats. You know what? Don't do the coats yet. We'll get to that in a minute. All right, I'm going to go back to the story. Coats was the term Mr. Cheeseman used to refer to all the spies, corporate hoodlums, and members of hyper-secret government agencies that would make the CIA seem very much like a church choir. "Why won't they just leave us alone?" asked Crandall. Actually, the question was posed by Crandall's sock puppet, which Crandall had named Steve and was never without. Pausing. If I were you, I would keep Steve on Crandall's page. I don't think he needs a separate one. Steve is the sock puppet. Crandall is the younger brother. Steve is the sock puppet that he has on his hand. Yes?
How do you spell Crandall again?
Crandall.
Thank you.
Back to the story. It was a gift, Steve the sock puppet, from his mother. And Crandall and Steve the sock puppet were virtually inseparable. Ever since she passed away from a mysterious illness, practically no one had seen Crandall's left forearm, not even Crandall himself. It was constantly covered by the snarky sock puppet, which over the years had become marbled with various unidentifiable stains and was missing its left eye. This is worth mentioning, because after all, when you think about it, the sock puppet is really nothing more than a sock with a couple of eyeballs glued on. This meant that Steve the sock puppet was only one eyeball away from being a mere sock, a condition that would have contributed to his overall snarkiness. Steve never missed an opportunity to comment on anything and everything in his annoyingly squeaky voice, which sounded not unlike a dolphin with laryngitis, if you can imagine such a horrible squeaking. "I think we should stay and fight them instead of running all the time," said Steve with an unintentional wink. I've lost my place. Oh, there we go. "We've been over this 100 times, Steve," said Mr. Cheeseman, using all the patience he could muster. "Now, boys, please hurry. Both of you." Steve the sock puppet cleared his throat. "Sorry," said Mr. Cheeseman. "I mean all three of you." The boys dragged themselves from their beds with the most sorrowful sounds imaginable. Crandall reached up to the top of the bedpost where a large wad of pink, dust-covered goo rested. He tugged at the putty-like substance, but it absolutely refused to budge. "My gum won't come off," he whined. "It's stuck." "Borrow your sister's hairdryer," said Mr. Cheeseman, who seemed to have an answer for just about everything. "Scientifically speaking, the heat will increase the speed of the atomic particles that make up the gum and should loosen it up nicely. Now let's move it. And Barton?" "Yes, Dad?" "Don't forget your pants." In the bathroom down the hall, the boy's sister, Saffron, 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 Saffron was already up, standing before the mirror and combing her long, wavy auburn hair. In these situations, Mr. Cheeseman always woke Saffron first, giving her a little extra time with her hair, which she washed each morning with her specially formulated wheat germ, honey, strawberry, coconut, apple pectin shampoo with pineapple and Canadian bacon. After a lengthy lathering, her hair would be treated with cream rinse, followed by a conditioner, special split-end repair, and 400 strokes from a brush made of imported porcupine quills. Her attention to her hair should in no way be taken to mean that she was what's known as a girly girl. In fact, she was quite adept at very non-girly girl things, like running, jumping, archery, and putting her little brother in a headlock when it became necessary to do so. It should also be noted that her extensive hair care regimen was carried out not in vanity, but out of fondness for her mother, Olivia. Young Saffron was, at 12 years old, the spitting image of her late mother, who had the most beautiful auburn hair that has ever grown on any head, human or otherwise. When Saffron looked into the mirror, she felt as though she were looking at the soft and pretty face of her mother in a way. This gave Saffron comfort and hope that she might one day see her mother alive again. Of course, there would be absolutely no chance of that ever happening if the LVR, which incidentally stands for Luminal Velocity Regulator, were to fall into the wrong hands. As Saffron continued to groom her shimmery locks, Pinky, the family dog, trotted into the bathroom, put her front paws up on the toilet seat, leaned in as far as she could, and began lapping at the water. This was something Pinky did every day, except for 2 weeks in December, when she chose instead to drink from the Christmas tree stand. Other than that, drinking from the toilet was a daily routine for the amiable fox terrier. This, you would think, should be a practice that most dog owners would attempt to discourage. But if not for their dog's peculiar habit, Mr. Cheeseman and his 3 children would certainly have been nabbed by any one of their many pursuers. Simply put, Pinky's bad behavior had on numerous occasions saved their lives. Allow me a moment of your time to explain. Pinky is the dog, yes.
So would you count that as character?
You can. I mean, they do mention Pinky a lot. So if you want to make a page for Pinky, that's good. By the time Olivia had finally succumbed to her mysterious illness, she had been taking many, many different medications. So many that the various bottles barely fit into the medicine chest above the sink in the bathroom. When Ethan made the decision to go into hiding with his family so he could safely complete work on the LVR, he packed up all their belongings. A notorious neat freak, he cleaned the house from top to bottom. This included getting rid of his late wife's many bottles of medicine. Which brings us back to Pinky, the family dog. Now, everyone knows you cannot dispose of prescription medication simply by throwing it into the trash. It could be discovered by young children who might mistake the brightly colored pills for candy. Thus, as I'm sure you already know, the medicine must always be flushed. And so, one early gray morning in February, as his children slept, Mr. Cheeseman stood at the medicine chest, dumping bottle after bottle of pills into the toilet. The tablets plopped into the water like handfuls of pebbles on a calm, clear lake, albeit a very small lake, contained entirely within a porcelain bowl. Mixed in with the falling pills was a generous helping of Mr. Cheeseman's tears, and as he stood there weeping and turning the toilet water a murky, grayish purple with the dissolving pills, the phone rang. Because Mr. Cheeseman was expecting a very important call from the police, he stopped what he was doing and he walked to the living room to find the phone resting in its cradle. He wiped his eyes, gave his nose a few good sniffs, and answered the phone. He was immediately annoyed to find that the person on the other end of the line was not the important phone call he had been expecting. In fact, it was someone with whom he had no desire to speak whatsoever. This undesirable person was calling, he said, to see if Mr. Cheeseman was happy with his current long-distance telephone service, and if not, would he be willing to switch to another service that might save him up to $50 a month. When Mr. Cheeseman returned to the bathroom, he was horrified to see Pinky engaged in her early morning quench, lapping at the purplish gray water in the toilet. "Pinky, no!" Mr. Cheeseman shouted, but it was too late. In the few seconds he had been gone, the dog had ingested, along with several hundred tears, the contents of numerous and various pills, liquefied and joined together in some sort of medicinal stew. When Pinky heard Mr. Cheeseman holler, she spun around with a crazed look in her eyes, which seemed to move completely independent of each other. She growled something in what sounded like an ancient Viking dialect, then promptly completed a dozen spins in a counterclockwise direction as Mr. Cheeseman watched helplessly. "Pinky, are you okay? Come here, girl," he said, squatting down as he looked directly into the dog's spasmodic eyes. As Ethan leaned closer to Pinky, speaking in soothing tones, she spun one last time and then suddenly bolted from the room between the stunned scientist's legs. From the bathroom, Pinky ran into the living room. This is not to say that she ran from the bathroom to the living room, but that she actually ran into the living room. into the wall, knocking off several photos and leaving a fairly noticeable fox terrier-sized dent. She then promptly turned around and ran headlong into the opposite wall, creating much the same effect. She continued this frenetic exercise for a good 5 minutes, leaving no wall unscathed, until finally the dog completed a dozen or more spins and collapsed onto the floor, looking very much like a drunken pirate. That is, if dogs could be pirates. For days, Pinky lay in a coma, and the children kept an around-the-clock vigil at her bedside, hoping and praying that she would one day come back to them. Then, on the very day that they were to leave behind the only life they had ever known, Pinky stood up, yawned, gave herself a shake, causing every last bit of hair to fall out, leaving her completely bald and appropriately pink, while leaving the carpet a hairy mess. And though she would remain completely hairless, she seemed otherwise entirely back to normal. Or as normal as a dog that drinks from the toilet can be. But as the weeks and months went by and Mr. Cheeseman and his 3 children moved from one town to the next, always keeping one step ahead of the Coates, it soon became apparent that there was something very different about Pinky. Pinky, it seemed, had somehow developed psychic abilities, which enabled her to sense danger and warn of disaster long before it happened. Her knack for identifying perilous situations and individuals with evil intent was uncanny. It was quite impossible to watch a whodunit on television with Pinky in the room, because the minute the bad guy appeared on the screen, Pinky would give it away by narrowing her eyes and growling through clenched teeth. Her unique abilities had saved Mr. Cheeseman and his children from many a close call, including this very night when she burst into Mr. Cheeseman's room, jumped up onto the bed, and emitted a low growl that had become her trademark portent of doom. "What is it, Pinky?" Mr. Cheeseman muttered. "Grrr," Pinky answered. "Are you sure?" "Grrr." Okay. Once the children were up and dressed and had packed their suitcases, Mr. Cheeseman ordered them to gather in the boys' room and wait there while he prepared the car for their escape. "It's not fair," said Saffron as she threw a paperback book across the boys' bedroom, bouncing it off the closet door. This may seem like an odd thing to throw, considering that books are not terribly aerodynamic. She threw the book because it was about the only thing she could find to throw. Just about everything else, toys, clothes, school supplies, Barton's baseball equipment, Saffron's archery equipment, and Crandall's collection of dirt clods shaped like famous people, had all been packed up and loaded into the family station wagon. "I don't want to move again," Saffron said, searching in vain for something else to throw. The only thing she could find was Crandall's giant blob of pink, flavorless bubble gum that was still firmly affixed to the bedpost. Much stronger than her little brother, she yanked it from its perch and flung it across the room, where it stuck firmly to the wall about 6 feet above the floor. "Hey, that's my gum!" Crandall protested while running across the room, dragging his suitcase behind him, as the blob had landed well above his natural reach. "Keep it down, you guys," said Barton. "Dad's got enough to worry about without listening to you fighting." "How's he going to hear us?" said Saffron. "He's out in the garage loading up that stupid machine." "You shouldn't say stupid," said Crandall as he stood on the suitcase and with his non-sock puppet hand peeled the bubble gum from the wall and plopped it into his mouth. "Stupid is a bad word." "Stupid is putting something in your mouth that has been stuck to the wall," Saffron snapped back. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Saffron sat down on the bed and dropped her face into her hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know why we have to move. I'm just tired, that's all." "We're all tired of moving," said Barton. "I like this house," said Crandall sadly, as he sat beside his older sister. "I like the way the driveway smelled when it rained." "I liked the plum tree out back," said Saffron. "I like the fuzzy carpet," said Steve. "Don't worry," said Barton. "I'm sure the next house will have lots of things we like about it as well." "You never know," said Saffron. "Remember the light blue house with the leaky roof and the people next door who yelled all the time? There was nothing good about that house." Yeah, said Crandall. And what about that old farmhouse that got so cold at night and it made all those creepy noises? Well, at least we were only there for 6 weeks, Barton reminded them. The bedroom door popped open, and Mr. Cheeseman walked in with Pinky on his heels. Okay, gang, let's move out. Saffron gave her reflection in the bedroom window one last glance and decided her hair looked good enough for the purposes of escaping under the cover of darkness. Her brothers, on the other hand, seemed to have no interest whatsoever in how their hair looked. Barton at least had the decency to put on a baseball cap, so his sheeply mass of black curls only stuck out from the sides and back. They matched in color, if not thickness, his recently arrived teenage mustache, of which Barton was very proud, even though it was quite patchy and uneven, and from a distance could be mistaken for crumbs of burnt toast. When it came to grooming, Crandall was another matter altogether. His short blonde hair shot out in all directions, and his big, round, spiky head reminded Saffron of something in a comic book when one character is hit in the head by another. Inside the jagged bubble, you might see the words kapow, blammo, or zoinks. To make matters worse, Crandall's bald spot had not yet fully grown back. Less than a week before, Crandall had fallen asleep while chewing a wad of bubble gum roughly the size of a billiard ball, something his father had warned him about repeatedly. The following morning, Crandall awoke with Steve the sock puppet firmly stuck to his head, bonded tightly by the hardened pink goo which had fallen from the boy's mouth as he slept. Following a 2-hour operation involving peanut butter, scissors, and crying, Steve the sock puppet and Crandall the crying boy were no longer joined at the head, but each sported a bald spot roughly the size and shape of a silver dollar pancake. Now, nearly a week later, Crandall's bald spot had partially grown back, though Steve, being a mere sock puppet, would have no such luck. Barton, said Mr. Cheeseman, what about your earmuffs? Dad, I'm fine. I'd appreciate it if you'd put them on just till we get rolling. I'd hate for you to fall over and break your arm on the way to the car. I've been cured of that, Dad, really. Though interested in sports and very athletic, Barton often fell over due to an inner ear imbalance that he had had since birth. To give you an idea of how serious a malady this was, on one occasion he fell down a flight of stairs. It was an escalator going up, and he kept falling for 2 hours until they closed the mall for the night. This is where having a brilliant scientist and inventor for a father can come in quite handy. Mr. Cheeseman developed a special set of earmuffs that sent out inaudible sound waves to help maintain perfect inner ear balance. Barton sighed and pulled the earmuffs from his pocket and put them on. Thanks, I appreciate that, said Mr. Cheeseman. Now, how about the rest of you? Are you sure you've got everything? I've got everything, said Crandall. Me too, said Steve the sock puppet. Oh no, said Saffron. I think I forgot my hairbrush. Who cares about your stupid hairbrush? Said Steve, to which Saffron replied by soundly bonking him on his patchy one-eyed sock puppet head. Blammo. A bit of advice for inventors. What separates us humans from the animals, besides indoor plumbing, the right to vote, and wrinkle-free slacks, is our capacity to invent things. Things like wrinkle-free slacks. Even monkeys, as smart as they might be, have never invented anything. It remains a cold, hard fact that even the monkey wrench was not invented by a monkey, but by a human. In addition, the dog sled, the bear hug, the crow's nest, the fisheye lens, and the catamaran, all invented by humans, not animals. Nothing has ever been invented by an animal, though there are a few who to this day will argue that horseplay was invented by horses. Regardless, the point is that human beings are by far the world's most prolific inventors. Perhaps the greatest of all these inventors was Thomas Alva Edison, who invented, among other things, the name Alva. To give you an idea of the genius of Edison, you should know that at the time of his death, he held over 1,200 patents, which would be a lot of weight for a person his age to be holding. Maybe that's what killed him. The patent is the one and only way an inventor can protect himself or herself from those who might wish to steal an idea. Without the benefit of a patent, it's entirely possible that an inventor could be denied any and all credit for a brilliant invention. The wheel, for example, was one of the first inventions of early man, and it resulted in them being even earlier, provided they didn't attempt to travel during rush hour. The wheel is arguably the greatest invention of all time, though the name of its inventor remains a mystery because in those days there were no patents. There were no patents because there were no lawyers. That is, until the wheel was invented and people ran over some people, and then there were lawyers everywhere. And so my advice to any and all would-be inventors is to make sure that you patent and protect your ideas if you wish to receive the proper credit. And as is in the case of Mr. Ethan Cheeseman, I would advise you to be extremely careful that you do not invent something so fantastically wonderful and useful that you become the target of corporate villains, international super spies, and government agencies so secret that their names are not known. We're going to pause there for a second.